The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as he stepped onto the cracked linoleum floor. Footsteps echoed in the empty rest stop, the hum of refrigeration units punctuating the silence. A low murmur, almost a whisper, drifted from the shadows. "Near the vending machines. You lost, man?" A voice, clipped and casual, tried to mask amusement. He paused, letting the question hang. Calm, measured, he replied, "No, just passing through." The laughter didn't stop, just shifted, sharper this time. A chair scraped against the tile. "You sure you're in the right place?" He straightened, shoulders back, eyes scanning. Every instinct warned him of the power imbalance. Their badges, the way they occupied space without consequence. But he breathed slowly, steadying himself. One officer stepped closer, hand hovering near a belt. "ID. Now." I left it in. "The car," he said softly, voice even, controlled. The words were simple, but they carried weight. A tense pause followed. Another officer snorted, leaning against the counter. Funny. Usually they're quicker with a wallet. His mind drifted, not in fear, but in quiet reflection. Past humiliations, unjust stops, whispers in hallways, dismissals from jobs, all lined up behind his eyes, yet the calm on his face betrayed none of it. "I said I left it in the car," he repeated, firmer this time. Silence, thick and oppressive, filled the room. A shadow shifted. Someone cleared their throat. Eyes met briefly, recognition flickering, doubt surfacing. The laughter stopped. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and began moving toward the exit. Each step echoed dignity, restraint, and a quiet, unyielding presence that neither smirk nor badge could diminish. He moved toward the restroom, each step measured, careful not to give them any satisfaction. A smirk from behind the coffee counter caught his eye. One officer nudged another, nodding slightly, lips curling. "Look at him," one muttered under his breath, barely audible. "Thinks he belongs here." He didn't flinch. His hands stayed relaxed at his sides. The words stung only because he knew they carried years of assumptions, unspoken rules, invisible walls built for people like him. "You got a plan? Or just wandering?" another voice said, sharper this time. "I'm fine," he answered softly, eyes forward. Calm, almost cold. But inside, memories flickered. Hallways where laughter followed him, calls ignored when he reported harassment, subtle. Glances that reminded him of the world's hierarchy. The officers exchanged another glance. Whispered laughter. One tapped the brim of his hat as if emphasizing dominance. Another leaned back, arms crossed, eyes narrowing. "You sure you're not lost again?" the first officer asked. "I know exactly where I am," he said, voice even, controlled. Every syllable deliberate. The whispering continued, subtle, almost hidden, but the weight of it pressed against the room. People passing by glanced quickly, some pausing, others averting eyes. The tension wasn't loud. It was in the stares, the shifting posture, the quiet assertion of control that only made him more composed. He paused at the doorway, took a slow breath. The officer's smiles faltered ever so slightly. "I'm just here to use the restroom," he said, almost conversational. The words held authority beyond volume. A long pause followed. No one spoke. Their confidence, once unshakable, wavered under the calm certainty he carried. Without a word, he stepped inside, leaving them with the echo of his dignity. He paused in the restroom doorway, eyes lingering on the cracked tile. The faint buzz of the fluorescent lights seemed louder now. A soft cough behind him made him glance up. The same officers leaning against the sinks, arms crossed, smirks returning. "You okay in there?" one asked, voice low but heavy with implication. "I'm fine," he said evenly, turning toward the mirror. He watched his own reflection, saw the calm mask, the measured movements, and thought of every time he had been dismissed, overlooked, or laughed at. "You sure? You look tense," another muttered. Tense. The word echoed in his mind. He remembered. The school hallway where a teacher ignored his complaint, the supervisor who waved him off, the traffic stop where he was presumed guilty before a word was spoken. Each moment piled silently on top of the next. "I said I'm fine," he repeated, softer, but with firmness that didn't invite further argument. The first officer leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. "Why so quiet? You got nothing to say?" "I have everything to say," he replied, calm. "Just not here." A pause followed. The officers exchanged looks, doubt flickering behind their eyes. Their laughter faded, replaced by subtle unease. He moved toward the sink, splashed water on his hands, letting the sound fill the room. Silence hung heavy. "I remember everything," he said under his breath, not to them, but to himself. The words weren't loud, but they carried weight. The officers straightened, tension visible, their earlier bravado crumbling. He straightened his jacket, nodded once, and walked out. Every step was deliberate, controlled, a quiet reclaiming of space that spoke louder than any confrontation. "You. Lost, man." The voice cracked the silence, rough and forced, trying to assert dominance. "No, just passing through," he said, calm, eyes forward, tone steady. Each word weighed, deliberate, carrying more authority than the officer expected. A short laugh broke out, but it was brittle, uncertain. "Passing through, huh?" another officer muttered, leaning on the counter. "Looks like you're stuck here for a while." "I'm not stuck," he replied evenly. The simplicity of his voice drew attention. No anger, no pleading, just presence. One officer stepped closer, hand hovering near his belt. "Better have your ID ready," he said, voice low, almost a threat. "I left it in the car," he answered quietly, almost conversational. Not a challenge, but a refusal to be cornered. A pause. They looked at each other, reassessing. "What's with the calm?" the first asked, voice cracking slightly. "You supposed to be scared or something?" "I don't need to be scared to know what's right," he said softly. The words landed heavier than any shout, settling between them like a weight. The officers shifted, unsure, smiles fading. He sensed it, the first tiny cracks in their facade. The laughter had died, replaced by a quiet, uncomfortable scrutiny. "You, another started, hesitating. "I said I'm just passing through," he repeated, voice unshaken, but eyes sharp, unwavering. Silence stretched, oppressive, making their small movements obvious, tremors of doubt flickering across features. He nodded once, slight, almost imperceptible, and moved past them. Every step was measured, reclaiming space that had been theirs to assume for so long. Their authority had shifted in a heartbeat, unseen but undeniable. The laughter that had been easy and careless now sounded brittle. One officer leaned against the wall, fingers tapping lightly, almost nervously. Another's hand hovered near a belt, shifting weight from foot to foot. "Relax," the first said, voice trying to stay casual, but the edge betrayed him. "It's just a rest stop." "I am relaxed," he replied, keeping tone even. His eyes scanned the space, noting every twitch, every micro-expression. The officer's gestures, once confident, now seemed forced, rehearsed. "You got friends around here or something?" another asked, voice low, eyes narrowing. "Just myself," he said softly. No pause, no hesitation, just calm, measured, deliberate. A slight smirk appeared, then vanished as doubt flickered. "You always this calm?" the first officer murmured. "Even when you know things could get rough?" "I know how to handle what comes," he said simply. The words were quiet but firm, carrying more authority than any shout. Hands lingered over radios, phones, belts, yet no one made a move. Their arrogance was cracking, small and almost imperceptible. He noticed the brief glances at each other, the whispered calculations, the way their confident postures were bending slightly under tension. "You sure you're just passing through?" one finally asked, voice uncertain. "I am," he replied, eyes forward, expression calm. "You don't need to worry about me." The room seemed to shrink around them, silent but heavy. Each pause emphasized the unspoken power shift. He moved toward the exit, slow and steady, reclaiming ground while their confidence faltered. The imbalance that had felt permanent now seemed fragile, held together only by habit. He stepped out, leaving them with their own unease. A quiet realization. That control had subtly, irrevocably begun to slip. A hand landed lightly on his shoulder, just enough to claim attention, to assert presence. "ID," the officer murmured, voice low, almost casual but loaded. He felt the weight, the familiar. Pressure of authority, the invisible assumption that he would comply without question. He looked up slowly, meeting eyes that flickered with expectation. "I left it in the car," he said, voice calm, quiet, deliberate. The officer hesitated, a twitch in the jaw. "You sure about that?" "Yes," he replied softly. Each syllable, steady, measured, like a clock ticking in a silent room. Another officer stepped closer, tone sharper this time. "You know the rules." "I know them," he said, keeping voice even. "I also know how to move within them." A pause stretched, heavy, oppressive. The murmured hum of the vending machines and distant engines seemed to amplify the silence. "You think you're untouchable?" one asked, whispering as if afraid to admit doubt. "I think I'm aware," he said simply. Awareness, not arrogance. That distinction made the room shift, subtle but undeniable. Fingers twitched over radios, belts, phones. The officers exchanged glances, uncertainty creeping in. Their posture faltered, their confidence fading like shadows in dim light. "Just cooperate and this'll be over," one said, almost pleading. "I am cooperating," he replied. Calm, but not passive. Control had shifted imperceptibly, tension balanced on a knife edge. He took a breath, letting the silence speak for him. Eyes met theirs again, unwavering, and he moved. Slow, deliberate, reclaiming the space they assumed was theirs. The hand lifted. The tension hung like smoke, suspended. No one moved first. The moment lingered. The air thickened with anticipation. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, letting the memories surface. "Remember that day in the parking lot?" A voice from his past whispered, internal but sharp. "The officer demanding your license. You were trembling inside." "I wasn't trembling," he said softly, though the memory stung. His hands flexed at his sides. "I was keeping track." Another flicker. The manager at work brushing off his complaint. "It's nothing, don't make a scene," she had said, barely looking at him. "I wasn't making a scene," he murmured quietly to himself. "I was watching." Classroom echoes came next, teachers overlooking his questions, peers snickering quietly. "Why even try?" a younger version of him whispered. "I always tried," he said, tone steady, firm, though chest tightened. Each recollection built invisible layers, a quiet armor shaped by indignity. "You've carried it for years," another whisper reminded him. "Every look, every small dismissal." "I know," he replied, slow, deliberate. "And I've learned patience. I've learned restraint. I've learned how to survive without losing myself." The air felt heavier, memories intertwining with present tension. He could almost feel the judgmental glances at the rest stop, the arrogance, the assumptions, the subtle threats. Every hand hovering over a belt, every smirk, they were echoes amplified by decades of being overlooked and dismissed. You could explode, one memory teased, almost taunting. I could, he admitted quietly, but I don't need to. Watching, waiting. That has power, too. A soft nod, barely perceptible. He breathed, centering himself. Each humiliation stored, each slight remembered, had become a quiet strength. The past no longer controlled him. It informed him. And when the time came, the balance would shift. He set the kettle on, listening to it hum. A soft knock at the door made him pause. "Morning," his neighbor said, voice casual but eyes sharp. "Still reading those papers?" "They tell the story no one wants to hear," he replied quietly, not meeting her gaze. His fingers traced the edge of a folded article about a local officer under investigation. "You ever get tired of it?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I get tired of pretending it doesn't matter," he said, lowering his eyes. "Every headline is someone else's silence coming back around." The sunlight shifted, catching the dust on the counter. He picked up a half-opened letter from an anonymous tip, scanned the words carefully. "They're watching," he murmured aloud. "Every misstep noted, every complaint filed away." "Why keep going?" she pressed. "Why not let it slide?" He smiled faintly, tight. "Because sliding means giving them power. Quiet doesn't equal weakness." Another newspaper headline caught his eye. Allegations of misconduct at the rest stop. He ran a hand over it, absorbing the weight. "They think they're untouchable," he said. "They think the system protects them. But watching, waiting, that's how the truth grows. Patience isn't passive, it's preparation." The neighbor frowned, sensing the tension thickening. "And when it ends?" "When it ends," he replied, voice steady, "it won't be a shout. It'll be the silence that speaks. Every unchecked hand, every dismissive glance, it all adds up. And then finally it balances." He turned back to the cluttered table, stacking letters with precision. Sunlight fell over the room, sharp yet calm, highlighting the careful orchestration behind. His composed exterior. Each shadow held memory, each corner a reminder. Vigilance is quiet power, and the world is only just beginning to notice. He stepped into the small-town cafe, noticing the familiar badges at the corner table. The officers laughed loudly, drinks in hand, unaware of the scrutiny around them. "Did you see the headline?" one said, smirking. "They actually let him walk away." "Walk away?" another replied, voice dripping with disbelief. "He's lucky we didn't—" A waitress paused nearby, wiping a cup. Her eyes lingered on the men, tension stiffening her shoulders. "Maybe watch your tone," she said softly, almost to herself. "Why?" "Everyone knows we run things here," the first officer scoffed, leaning back. "Rules don't apply the same to us." He remained at the doorway, observing. Micro-expressions betrayed cracks, an eye darting, a hand tightening on a glass, a forced laugh. Their confidence was a veneer. Beneath it, unease flickered. "Hey, you think anyone noticed?" one whispered, voice lowering. "That guy at the rest stop. He didn't fight back." "That's the thing," said the other, tone sharper now. "They always play nice until someone shows them." The cafe hummed with whispered conjecture. Patrons shifted in their seats, glances exchanged, the quiet pressure building. "You hear that?" muttered a barista to a coworker. "People are talking." The first officer's smirk faltered. "Talking won't change anything." "Doesn't mean it won't matter," the other replied, voice tight, a shadow of doubt breaking through. He moved closer to the counter, scanning the room. The officer's posture stiffened, each laugh now hollow. The safety of their uniform no longer felt absolute. Whispers circled like currents, bending the room's energy, eroding the illusion of control. Silently, he realized patience and observation were the true power. Their arrogance in plain sight was their weakness, and the world around them had already begun to lean away even if they didn't notice. He leaned against the far wall, coffee cup in hand, watching the office hum with routine chatter that felt suddenly brittle. "Do we report this?" The internal affairs officer's voice barely rose above the hum of typing. He froze at the question, eyes darting toward a senior colleague who shrugged, disinterest masking uncertainty. "Do we?" he repeated, softer this time, tension threading every syllable. A friend at the next desk leaned closer, voice a whisper but sharp as a knife. "They won't know what hit them." The words hung between them, weighted, deliberate. The office seemed to contract, each movement more cautious than the last. "Is it safe?" the officer asked, glancing at the senior whose fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitant. "Safer than doing nothing," came the quiet reply, eyes fixed on the papers before them. From his corner, he observed every micro-expression, the hesitation, the subtle nod, the swallowed breath. Each unspoken thought, every twitch, mapped the fractures in a system long thought impermeable. "They think they're untouchable," the first whispered again, voice barely audible. "But patience changes everything." The friend's lips curved slightly, a hint of grim acknowledgement. "One small push, one right move, that's all it takes." He sipped his coffee slowly, the warmth doing nothing to calm the chill crawling up his spine. The silence around the desk amplified every sound. Keyboards, phones, murmurs, all punctuating the tension that had crept into the office like smoke. Then, "We move carefully," the officer murmured, voice resolute, eyes scanning the room. Every glance seemed to signal a subtle pact forming, a quiet, strategic alignment against the arrogance that had blinded those in power. Outside, the world remained oblivious, but inside, the whisper of intervention was enough. "Have you seen this?" a young employee whispered, leaning over a colleague's shoulder. The screen showed a shaky video. Uniformed officers at the rest stop, their faces tense, hands hovering, voices low but loaded. Yeah," the colleague replied, voice tight, fingers hovering over the mouse. "It's going everywhere." "Already?" the first asked, disbelief flickering in their eyes. "Minutes ago, barely uploaded." "They didn't expect it," another muttered, eyes fixed on the comment section. "Everyone's talking, even outside our city." The video replayed, short clips, blurred faces, muffled laughter turning uneasy. The protagonist's calm, posture, deliberate, almost serene, stood in stark contrast to the officer's twitching unease. "Look at the replies," someone said, scrolling. "People see it for what it is. No edits, no filters, just truth." "I can't believe they thought it would stay hidden," whispered another. A hand lingered near a keyboard, hesitant, unsure if typing or remaining silent would matter more. The murmurs spread, others leaning in, exchanging brief, pointed glances. "It's getting traction," someone noted, voice low but urgent. "News sites already linking." One officer in the video recoiled slightly, eyes flicking toward the camera, unspoken dread visible. "They're watching," said a colleague softly, voice barely audible, as if voicing it aloud might hasten the collapse. The room seemed to shrink with every view count, every share, every retweet. Silence punctuated the growing awareness, the quiet force of public judgment creeping in. "They won't ignore it this time," someone whispered, barely audible. As notifications pinged and screens flickered, the narrative shifted. Power trembled, accountability pressed closer, and the world watched in hushed anticipation, ready to see what consequences would follow. "Did you see the latest thread?" one aide whispered, voice low, barely above. A murmur. It's spreading faster than we thought. Another leaned back, fingers tapping the polished desk. Yeah, and people are connecting dots. The old cases, the complaints that were buried. A third voice, hesitant. Do they even realize how much this could shake the entire precinct? Doesn't matter if they realize it or not, the first replied, eyes flicking toward a darkened office corner. The truth has a way of surfacing. Always. A heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioner. Papers shuffled, briefcases clicked. Every glance seemed calculated, every movement measured. You think anyone will actually get punished? The second asked, voice tight, almost afraid to finish. Not if we cover for each other, muttered a veteran officer, face hard, jaw tight. But someone's going to slip, inevitably. The protagonist, observing from a distance, let nothing show, composure unshaken, eyes quietly noting every flicker of unease, every subtle betrayal. Years of muted indignity and patient restraint crystallized in the stillness. Remember the Smith case? Someone asked, almost as a dare. The memo that disappeared? Another nodded. It was right there in the files, just vanished. But now, people are starting to remember, starting to speak. They can't stop it anymore, said the first voice. The walls are cracking and everyone's holding their breath. The protagonist's gaze swept the room. Whispered confessions, furtive glances, the microaggressions that had once gone unnoticed, now stark, undeniable. Each word, each pause, each slip of the tongue fed the momentum. And in that quiet observation, dignity remained. The world shifted imperceptibly, power trembled subtly, and the tipping point hovered just beyond reach, waiting for the final moment. Room's ready, the bailiff muttered, voice clipped, scanning the courtroom. Two officers shuffled in, folders clutched tight, eyes darting to corners, avoiding direct contact with the man at the bench. "Do you see him?" one whispered, barely audible. He's the judge now?" "Yeah," another muttered, lips pressed thin. "Same guy from the rest stop, the one we—" "Don't even finish that sentence," snapped a senior officer, fingers twitching. "Keep your head down, sit, follow protocol." The protagonist leaned forward slightly, hands folded, calm, voice low but firm. "Good morning. Please rise." A collective shuffle, a sharp intake of breath. Their arrogance trembled, exposed for the first time under the high ceiling and sunlight streaming through glass. "Case number 2314, the judge continued, eyes scanning the room deliberately, lingering just long enough. "We'll address the complaints lodged against several officers last year. Let's start with opening statements." One officer cleared his throat, voice shaking slightly. I represent—" "Wait," the judge interrupted, calm, precise. "I expect honesty today. No omissions, no excuses." Another officer exchanged a nervous glance, jaw tightening. We followed procedure," he said, hesitant, defensive. "Procedure," the judge repeated, letting the word hang, "is only as just as those who enforce it. Let's be clear. Actions have consequences." A hush fell over the room. Papers rustled. Breaths held. Even the bailiff's hand lingered on the gavel. The protagonist's composure was absolute, unflinching. Silence, heavy yet poised, replaced the tension. Every subtle glance, every shift in posture betrayed their inner panic. And as the courtroom settled, sunlight catching the edge of the gavel, the balance of power had quietly, irrevocably shifted. Tapu. Courtroom's air felt heavier with each passing second. Papers shifted under fingers, pens hovered, and chairs creaked as if they were breathing. "Your Honor, we didn't—" One officer's voice trembled, almost swallowed by the vast space. The protagonist's gaze stayed steady, unwavering. "I remember everything." A faint pause. Heads tilted. Even the bailiff held his breath. No one moved. We followed. "Protocol!" another officer tried, voice tight, defensive, eyes flicking to peers for silent support. "Protocol," the judge repeated, letting the word linger. Did that include threats? Silence? Avoidance? Each instance recorded? Each complaint ignored? Each microaggression catalogued? The first officer swallowed hard, fingers tightening on the folder. "We thought we were protecting—" "You thought wrong," the judge cut in, calm, precise. "You thought unchecked authority would shield you. It didn't. It won't." A quiver ran through another officer's jaw, subtle but unmistakable. "We didn't know it would—" "Actions," the judge said, voice low, "have consequences. Remember that. And accountability is not optional." A hush spread across the gallery. Colleagues shifted, whispers stifled under the weight of truth, eyes darting, guilt now tangible. The protagonist's hands remained folded, posture perfect. Serene silence, measured and deliberate, filled the courtroom. Every gaze, every subtle twitch of skin and muscle revealed internal collapse. He let the moment stretch, the officer's unspoken panic growing louder than words. "I will ensure history remembers," he added softly, letting the statement cut deeper than any raised voice, "and that no silence protects injustice again." A short, tense nod from the bailiff signaled forward movement. The courtroom exhaled collectively, a new balance quietly claimed, power reclaimed through restraint and unshakable dignity. The officers shifted in their seats, subtle tension etched into every line of their bodies. Fingers tapped, papers shuffled, shoulders rising and falling with unease. "Your Honor?" one began, voice shaky, barely above a whisper. "We—" "Sit down," the protagonist interrupted gently, eyes calm, unflinching. "There's nothing more to say until the facts speak for themselves." A long pause. The room seemed to contract, every breath amplified. One officer's hand hovered over a folder, trembling just slightly, the pressure betraying his nerves. "You've kept records," another murmured to a colleague, voice tight, almost inaudible. "We can't—" "They remember," the judge said softly, almost to himself. "Every instance, every silence, every assumption that power is a shield." A clerk cleared her throat, trying to maintain routine, but even she glanced up, sensing the shift. Whispers moved like ripples, curiosity and unease threading through the room. "We were wrong," the first officer admitted, shoulders stiff, voice quivering. "We didn't realize how—" "You didn't realize," the judge repeated, calm, measured, "because you believed your position made you untouchable. Belief does not equal immunity." Eyes darted, small movements betraying panic. Cameras clicked softly, flashes captured. The micro-expressions, the cracks forming in what had seemed unbreakable authority. The protagonist's lips curved in the faintest nod, a restrained acknowledgement of justice quietly claimed. No loud proclamations, no dramatic flourish, only the subtle rebalancing of power, the silent triumph of dignity over abuse. A colleague leaned in, whispering to another, "Look at him. He doesn't raise his voice. And yet—" The sentence trailed off. And in that moment, the officer's trembling hands and furtive glances became the evidence of moral clarity. A quiet reckoning unfolding with every unspoken acknowledgement, every nervous glance, every subtle shift in posture.